Welcome back. My name is Rush Lilavivat. I am the director of the tabletop panels here at DragonCon and professional game master. Um, I have done a lot of design work in the past, and I've been gaming for over 35 years. I'm going to let my co-hosts introduce themselves, starting with Abby. Go ahead.
I'm Abby. I go by Witty X Witch on social media and help run the DragonCon tabletop socials. I've only been gaming for about 8 years now, I think, but I game a lot, so that's something, I suppose.
A lot, yes.
I'm Jared Shoemaker. I am just a random gamer. I go by Penguin Sushi mostly online, but been running games and playing games with a group of college friends and other people for, I don't know, 20 years or so.
Jared is also my co-host on our podcast.
When we do that.
If you look up the Table Dragon podcast, you'll find a lot of great information on there as well. So today I wanted to talk about planning a game session, and the reason being is that, as I said before, I kind of want to go over a lot of foundational knowledge in terms of gaming, because when I look around the web and YouTube and that sort of thing, I see a lot of information on what I would call tips or tricks. And those are really good. And especially because they're easy to remember. If someone gives you a tip or trick, it's usually easy to remember. But I don't see a lot of work on foundational knowledge. So one of the most foundational things, of course, is planning a session. And I often hear that referred to, but very rarely do I see detailed information of how to do it. As a matter of fact, I was watching a video with Joe Manganiello not too long ago, and he talks about prepping. And he's like, you got to do a lot of prep. And I was like, that's really cool. And then he doesn't talk about what that looks like. I'm sure a lot of it because it looks differently for different people,
Right.
which we will talk about today. So I'm going to go over one way that I plan. I'm going to let my friends talk about how they plan a session, and then I'm going to go over a different way. Now, broadly speaking, I have found that there are various ways that people plan, but broadly speaking, I think that the ways I've seen it done are improv, where somebody makes up a lot of it on the fly. That's totally fine, as long as it doesn't become what I call punitively arbitrary, where it's like it's all the GM's whimsy and what they feel like in the moment. And so whether your abilities work or not are largely determined by how they're feeling at the time.
Right.
I've also seen on the opposite end, I've seen very much GMs, and I think GMs of this kind get an unfair bad rap, by the way, the quote unquote railroad, right? There is a specific storyline. You have to follow it. Oftentimes, I think GMs like that can get a bad rap because if you play a module is essentially a railroad. There's a thing that you have to do, and usually in a specific order. The difference is usually a module has a really good hook that leads you from point A to point B. And if a module is written really well, there's no reason that you would vary from those points. And I think a good straight narrative GM will usually provide those hooks. So those are the two broad ends of the spectrums. And the third way I've seen GMs do it is sort of a sandbox where they have a lot of different information. You're allowed to go where you want to go, but they have prepped for the various people and places that you might run into. So broadly speaking, what would you say your style is, Jared? Your own style?
Of the things that you mentioned, I think that I am closest to sandbox, but I got some parameters on that I'll touch on, I guess, when we get around to more details.
Okay, cool. Abby, how about you?
Because the games I'm running right now are intended to be episodic, right now they tend to be a bit more railroady, although I do have plans for other stuff that ends up being more sandboxy in the future.
Yeah, no worries. As a professional game master, I run about 10 campaigns right now, and almost all of them are planned differently. There are some that are planned similarly to others, but they're planned very differently because of the demands of my friends and clients. So, for example, if I have some people who want to play a module series, that's what they want, then the prep for that looks very different from people who want more of a sandbox type game. So I've had to adapt and run games very, very differently for different groups. But I wanted to really get into that nitty gritty with this YouTube episode. So let me show you guys actual notes from an actual game that I ran recently. Abby, if you don't mind showing that first thing that I sent to you. Okay, this is for a Ravenloft game, and this was designed to be a one-off. It says session 29, which is the session number. And then I have here a quick summary of what's going on, right? The party has fallen into a pocket dimension. While they're within a swirling library vortex, there are a few key pieces of information to be found in some of the books. So the where they fell was this big, huge pocket dimension with all these platforms floating around with all these books flying around, and they could open any of the books and find out information that I have down here. However they attain that information is up to the moment. So there is an element of improv here. So maybe they read it in a book. If no one's looking at a book, I might have like a gargoyle come to life and start talking to somebody, and the gargoyle will drop one or two pieces of this information. And down below there, you can see four things, or four book titles that I've got, because it's hard for everybody to come up with names, right?
Yeah.
So I knew that ahead of time, and I'm like, they're going to ask for book titles. So I came up with book titles right away on the bottom. So if you don't mind scrolling. Okay, so right there, well, you went a little bit too far. So basically, yeah, right. This book is the last refuge of Azaelan's mind before it shattered. So what they're going to be doing is fighting a dark echo of Azaelan, who's a Dark Lord in Ravenloft. His history goes way, way, way back. So they're not going to fight the Azaelan. That's too much. He's like a 20th level caster. But just like a mere memory of him. I have right here, I always highlight my important names in red. So when I go back over my notes, I can find names a lot easier. Sometimes if I have to make up an NPC on the spot, like say a barmaid, which literally I've had to do that, I will still highlight it in red, because if they go back and talk to that barmaid, I'll remember what the name was. Because a lot of my players take notes, and they take meticulous notes. And if I don't remember what the barmaid's name is, they will. So it's very embarrassing when it's like, no, that's not the name. Her name was Helga. Oh, okay, you're right. That kind of thing.
Right.
And you said she was a blonde, not a redhead. So when that sort of thing happens, I jot down a few notes, that sort of thing. This red thing is a possibility that never came up. I highlighted in red because that's where I intended the adventure to go to, but that's not where we ended up going. But the reason I highlighted that little paragraph in red was, okay, this is where I think I'm going with this, but ended up no. We did an episode on reading the room, and basically reading the room during the session, I'm like, I don't think they would enjoy this story. I don't think this story has any appeal for them, so I'm not going to do that.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So that was aborted in the moment.
Yes.
Okay.
I like the way you said that. Yes. I nixed that in the moment where I'm like, nope, they're not going to enjoy this. Something I really love to do with my notes, if you look down there, Azaelan's memory is walking around. So there's a guy who's walking around talking to them. And I actually put in quotes things he might say. Who are you? What are you doing here? Just don't stand there. Be about your business. The apparatus must be completed tonight. I will often do that with my NPCs. I'll actually write in phrases they might say. because when I'm taking notes, it helps me form their voice, their NPC voice. And so I
Right.
might use those phrases or might not, but it's mainly me getting into the head of the NPC. If you don't mind scrolling a little bit more. It says the apparatus must have those three energies. So it's a puzzle. They have to go get those three things to complete the apparatus. But guess what? Completing the apparatus is bad. They actually don't want to. So just as I planned, the party started with trying to complete the apparatus by getting those three things. But as they're putting them together, the memories or shadows of his former apprentices were like, hey, you don't want to do this. This is bad. And then the party talked amongst each other, like, should we help him or should we not help him? So that what that generated was great inter-party role play, right? So a great way to generate inter-party role play is to give them something to talk about. And it worked brilliantly. And then I had the spells that Azalin can cast right down there. And then right down there, to get out of this crazy pocket dimension, the party needs to place 3 energies on the doorstep. So which is exactly what happened. So that's basically what my notes look like. And as you can see, I mean, they're not like a jumble or a mess or things are zigzag. They're pretty straightforward. And they allow flexibility, right? There's floating, what I would call floating points. Here, they need to get these 3 pieces of information. Doesn't matter how, right? They need to get these 3 energy things to the apparatus. Doesn't matter how. We can decide that during the session. So I would call those floating points that allow for creativity, allow for something that I didn't account for, thinking outside the box. Thank you very much. So, Jared, do you want to go over some of your notes?
Sure. So notes are one thing, right? But I mean, we're talking about how to plan a session, right?
Yes.
And I could see somebody going, well, all right, that's what you have written down in your notes. But like, can I start like half a step before you get to notes?
Yes, please.
All right. So my thought was, when you said, hey, let's talk about how to plan a session, my thought was, how do I plan a session? Because, when you've been doing something for a long time, sometimes you don't always think through those. And actually, in thinking through those pieces, I think I maybe remembered something or learned something. But and we may have talked about this a little bit on the podcast as well. But fundamentally, what you do when you're planning a session is you're just kind of coming up for what is something for the players to do. And I mean the players. I mean, the characters are kind of their avenue through that, but something for the players to do, something for them to engage, because I mean, you're entertaining and you want something that they can engage with, right? So, all right, now that can be anything. So just what's fun with a role-playing game, the context comes in with the campaign, and we're not really delving into how you write a campaign or how you plan a campaign here. But with the way that I start with my notes and the way that I start with planning a session is, first consider where they are and what they're doing. And if this is the very first game of a campaign, that can be almost anything you want. Or maybe you workshop this with the players and you decided together, and then from there you go, okay, well, what's the next logical thing they'll probably be doing based on where they are and what they're doing now? Where are they pointed? Where are they going? Where does this look like it's moving? And if that can be multiple choice, in which case for me, that results in flowcharts or multiple different possible avenues. And then you think about that both in terms of the here and now, and then also the broader campaign. Where is this campaign leading, right? Or if it's the confrontation with the evil necromancer, how does what they're doing now play into that? Where can I sprinkle in foreshadowing and other relevant bits? So Abby, did you get the screenshot that I sent you? So my notes, Rush, actually look a whole lot like yours. I use a wiki because internal linking is life. So that just really helped me personally with organization. And I recommend it to everybody. Like you said, you put names in red. I make names into links, and if those links matter, then they get then they turn. I make a page for them, right? And then they're blue. But otherwise, if these are just kind of one-off NPCs, I've named them, so I have names. But all the ones that are there that are in red, those are names of places, and I have in my brain kind of what they're about. But I haven't gone as far as to writing any of that in notes yet. It may be on a different page. I may have a parenthetical, but those things don't have their own pages yet. So what I starts with, just like I said, is I start with where are they right now. So currently, this was the game notes for the Deadlands session that I ran last Thursday, and this is where they were and what they were doing. They had just got back to this little town that they were in. They had been hunting some critter that came into town and killed a couple of people. And the locals said it was a big bear, and now they're thinking it was not a big bear because Deadlands. And so they've come back and they've run into an NPC that one of them knows, this is Percy, knows, has a relationship with this guy. And he's kind of the I'm your friend, I'm your enemy kind of person. And he actually doesn't know the NPC's name. He just knows him as the man in the pinstripe suit. But so that's where they were currently. And then if you scroll down a little bit, then I say, here's probably what they're going to do. This is probably what they're going to do this session, or at least looking down the road. And they mostly, or what's going on. Some of those are not things they're doing. Some of those that are events that are happening to them, right? Or other things that are going on in the world. But I'll kind of just real quickly bullet point, you need to mention this, you need to mention this, or here's kind of where I'm going, so I can have a really high level view of what the session might look like. Now, again, because I tend to approach kind of sandboxy, sometimes there's a lot of different stuff here, but based on what they've said before, I kind of have an idea. Here's where they're going. And so I start writing down stuff here. They got as far as main bullet point number 4, and where it says checking on Una/Lisa, they really engaged with that. They really got hung up on this little girl NPC that, without getting into a gaming story, is injured severely, and they're like, we need to make sure that her and her mom are okay. And they were like, we're going to leave them some money. And so they went to check on them out at their claim, which is outside of town. And some weird, interesting things happened. They found out some stuff about that situation that I have written in notes elsewhere that I didn't anticipate them finding out. So they kind of took a left turn from what my probable progression was. I really, like you said, I wrote down a few things that they might do, but I really didn't know which one of those was going to be most important to them, or where they were going to go with that. So we haven't gotten as far as leaving town. At the very end of the session, they did leave town, so they are on their way to Flagstaff now. So I guess I got to that bullet point, but we didn't really. That was like curtains close because the whole session was them interacting with these two NPCs. So below that, and you can only see some of it. So below that, I kind of take each one of those bullet points, and there's where I break it out and make, okay, here's more detailed stuff about each one of those bullet points that's in the probable regression section. And this is where I get, and I don't know if you can see any more of it, but this is where I start putting things like you did. I loved what you said, Rush, about I'll put stuff in quotes that are things they might say. I absolutely do that. And I have a bunch of stuff. So anything that's in quotes is just kind of a something that he might say, or that might come up in conversation, or like I usually only do this if I want them to word something very intentionally. And with this kind of sly NPC, I wanted to make sure I had some good responses for the obvious in-character questions that I expect this NPC to ask, because this encounter was going to be tense. If it's something that's really casual, I don't always write down quotes. But if it's something that I'm like, they're going to ask this, and man, I need to have a good answer. So each one of those things above in the probable regression, that gets broken down, and I can scroll down and look at the notes for this scene or this thing. And I will skip over whole sections. Like if I have something in the progression and they just completely bypassed it, then I just gloss over that, go to the next thing. But that's kind of how I do it. I'll use the internal leaking if they were like, so back up at the top. I'm having Abby jump all over the place here. If you can. Back up at the top, you saw Clark's Ford is the name of the little town they're in. That's in blue. I have a page about that town. And so if they're doing something in that town that I didn't expect, I'll click on that. I'll hop over to that set of notes. And then I know what's in the town, what's going on in the town, who's important in the town. So what random NPC names in the town, that all that kind of stuff. So if they take a wildly left turn that I didn't see coming, and it's not in my main page of notes here, I got all these other linked pages that can fill in gaps that I can jump to if I need info or names or whatever. And I spend, I'll say, a third of my prep time naming stuff, particularly when it's difficult. I found that for Deadlands, it's actually not too tough, but for fantasy names, that's harder. And I will spend it because and I didn't send you this page, but if I sent you a page, that Clark's Ford page, or I mean, that's not a huge town, so there's not a lot of them, but some of the towns, like the one that I had, the page that I had for Phoenix is just, it starts off with about, I don't know, 50 lines of locations, and then in parentheses, 3 or 4 NPC names for each one. And these are all what you might call throwaway NPCs, but I feel like if I have a name, that makes it more real. And then if I need to flesh it out later, I just click on that name link. They're their own page, and I just start filling in details and go, okay, now this NPC matters. Whereas before it was just, oh, they're, random person here. So
I just want to say real quick that I love that they're wikis, because there are a lot of GM tools out there that are based on wikis, like Obsidian Portal and things like that. And this kind of illustrates exactly how you would use it.
I started using this in 2013 and never looked back, because my notes were always, binders. And I mean, all of us did that, right? 3-ring binders or notebooks or whatever. And finding anything just took forever. And I would be constantly flipping over. Oh, let me find that NPC's name. And man, just too much. And then I was like, oh, look, I can just click something and it will tell me. That's fantastic. Also, agreed. And I don't know if you're intimidated in this way, but I am. When I was working in a notebook, I'd be like, what do I need to do in what order? Right? I need to write this in first and then this in second. With a wiki, everything is so interrelated and it's non-linear. I can start wherever I want, start where the inspiration is and work backwards if you have to. That's really hard to do on a notebook. So yeah.
Awesome. Wonderful. Abby, how about you?
Well, my notes are a little scattered.
That's okay.
But yeah, so I've got 2 up at the moment. Let me pull up the first set. So this is how mine look for the episodic games that I do. So I always start with, like, again, this one is specifically for Dragon Age. So I'm starting with a base that's in the War Table missions as seen in Dragon Age Inquisition. I write down names, which are not highlighted because I didn't think of that. And I super should have. That would have been really smart. But oh well, I'm going to steal that now. And kind of give the quick premise, like what is the mission that my players are going to get assigned? And, what are the instructions? Then we get just sort of this line right here. They can decide if they want to do stealth or deception or diplomacy. Okay, neat. And then what do I need to know towards the end of that particular session?
I like that.
And so then this one was a little more in depth. I had a whole order of events of things that happened in the Wicked Eyes, Wicked Hearts quest. What are some things that we can hear happening? So as my players found secrets, I just scrolled right back up here and was like, all right, what have we talked about already in the video game? And these are ones that I don't spend a lot of time prepping for, just because I kind of know how my players are going to work, how they're going to operate. So I pretty much just need the beginning and the end, and then everything in the middle is like, yes, okay, and moving forward. So if my players are like, is there a tavern? Of course there is. What does the tavern have? Let me pull what I already know about this world. No problem. A set of notes that I have that is a little more in depth is a one shot I designed. And I say one shot, it ended up being two, as many one shots go.
Right.
Many. I would
And
say
so
all of them.
right, exactly. It starts off with content warnings because I had time to really think about what was going to be included in
Okay.
this. It gives context, and eventually I plan to publish this on my Ko-fi just as a freebie so that other people can run this. So I've included all this information that I feel would be necessary to someone who maybe hadn't played the video game yet. And so it has information on like the Grey Warden relationships and the relationship between Ferelden and Orlais at this time in Thedas' history. We have even more background of what's going on specifically in Thedas. And then we get to our notable characters, who they are, where might they be.
Gotcha.
And then we get to part one. And I'm going to scroll a little fast here because, I mean, it's part one, it's part two. It's the full narrative of them going along this road to then reach the town and then deal with the problem that is in the town. I've also got page numbers. Here we go. So here's where it like splits. There's a couple different things the players can do. And so then I have this chart to help me just figure out what I need to keep in mind for whichever route they choose. And of course they can always just run, but then I don't need to keep some stuff in mind because they're just running. And I'll make notes of the different enemies that they can fight. I've blocked them off into minor, moderate, major threats, and then the epilogue, as it were.
See, it's so funny. You said that your notes are a little bit more scattered. This looks way more organized than
Oh
mine.
yeah, this one, because I spent like weeks on it.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, this one was one I like worked multiple weeks, multiple months on and off, and would keep coming back to, and that's why it looks so nice. The other ones are ones I spend 2 weeks on max.
So do you, like with this, do you use that at the table? Or is that like your briefing that you read ahead of time and kind of keep more of that in RAM, as it were?
I use both.
Or both?
So with my shorter ones, I usually use that at the table. This is one that I read ahead of time, and I keep the charts for the table.
Right. Because I mean, I'm all about the bullet points because my brain cannot do paragraphs on the fly.
Right.
And so I was curious how other people do it. And yeah, I have some like blocks where I'm like, okay, make sure you have this in mind before we start. But yeah, it's got to be short and sweet if I'm using it at the table, or it just won't get used.
And part of the reason behind this particular one is that it is supposed to sort of be its own module that I will then put online. So then that's why it also is so blocky, because people do bullet points differently.
Yeah, it's got to make sense to anybody. And I would venture to say that my game notes and a lot of people's, it only has to make sense to me. And exactly. As long as it makes sense to me, that's all that matters. And so it's not super usable in its typical state by anybody else.
Exactly.
I write a lot of mine in paragraph form because it's mainly for me. Or, I mean, I'm sorry. It's mainly for when I go back over it, because I've taken a lot of notes in bullet point form, and then 5 sessions later, I go back. And then when I look at the bullet points, I'm like, wait, I don't know what I'm talking about. So it helps me to write out paragraphs so that when I go back, I'm like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. And so, but to your point, Jared, I don't look at those particular notes during the session very much, because you're right, I don't have time to scan a whole paragraph. So when I do write paragraphs, it's mainly for later.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Another thing I'll do with paragraphs is if I have a full document in paragraph form, I might print it out and then just use a highlighter.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Gotcha. So I'm curious if you could give 3 pieces of advice for planning to someone who is trying to learn how to plan, and they're, let's say their notes are all over the place and they always have a hard time coming up with like solid plans. What are 3 pieces of advice that you might give to that person, Abby?
If their notes are all over the place, I think the critical piece is what is crucial to this story. Block things off. What do you have to absolutely have in this session for the story to continue? And what's just flavor? What's bonus? What's extra? I would separate those 2 sections because Jared, you were talking about, if they miss it, they miss it. I'll just gloss over that detail and move to the next. I notice this with a lot of DMs. They're so excited about what they've made and they want to share it with their friends. And sometimes you'll get a perception roll, for example, that's like a 4. So they don't see anything, but they're like, but you do see this thing that I wanted to share with you. It's like, no, they didn't see it. They rolled a 4. And so I think it's that kill your darlings. Like, know that it is okay if it gets skipped right now. You can bring it back later.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not that important. So really separate out what is a necessity and what is just extra.
And if it's a necessity, don't have them roll for it.
Exactly.
I mean, just be like, oh, you see this.
And I think that's another thing too, because sometimes I will forget to ask for a roll. So if you know that something has to happen and you do need a roll for it, maybe put this is a roll and this is the minimum needed to meet this.
Yeah.
A lot of times what I do is I say, you don't need a roll. This is something you would, and I do a lot of this legitimately. Like, you as a citizen of this place, you know this, right?
Right.
Just like if you live in the United States, you know what Star Wars is.
Right. Pretty much.
So you don't need to make a roll, but make a roll to see if you get any extra information.
Right.
Exactly.
Typically if you do that, a lot of times they'll become intrigued with whatever that is anyway. Or maybe not. You leave it up to them, but you put the ball in their court. Jared, how about you? What are 3 pieces of advice you would give to someone planning something if their notes are kind of all over the place and they have a hard time getting their thoughts organized?
Well, I find that if you're having trouble planning, probably your thing is you just don't know where to start. And I mean, that's where I will struggle. And so the thing that I always go back to is you go, okay, what are they doing now? And what would be fun to do next? And then how does that make sense with the overall campaign or themes or the scenario or whatever? And so just kind of like, I guess, don't try to do everything at once. Scale back and you go, okay, here's where they are and what they've done. So you have that canon, right? You can't violate that. And based on that, probably something about where they're pointed, something about where they're probably good. Even if it's a really broad shotgun kind of, well, they could do any one of these things. Okay, jot down some notes about those things. And then pick the one that you think is the most likely and maybe spend a little more time on that, but make sure you have something for the other ones. But consider where they are and what it looks like they're doing, and then go, okay, what can we do with this that will be fun, that people will enjoy, that will be engaging? And I've mentioned this before, but a lot of this comes back to pacing too. And we haven't really dedicated a lot of time to talking about how you pace a game, and because that is definitely an art. But what's going to make this session good? I got 2 hours, I got 4 hours. And so it'd be cool if we had some action. It would be cool if we had some dramatic role play or whatever, and just figure out where those things can fit in. I don't see any problem in kind of backfilling it that way. And even justifying something that would be fun with what you've got going on in the campaign if you're really stumped. If you're really like, I just don't know how to plan this. I don't know, and if this is session 1, I mean, then you've got almost no baggage. But if this is session 22, you've got all this stuff going on. And I know how sometimes the weight of canon is just, you're like, man, I have to keep track of all this stuff, and there's stuff that they have to do, but it helps to take a step back and say, okay, what would be fun, and how can we make this work with the overall story? So yeah, look at the next few things they're likely to do and just jot down some stuff.
And
I mean,
I
is that
like
not
that. That's excellent
I don't know, is that not helpful?
No,
And
that's
I'll-
excellent advice.
yeah, and I'll also add, like, you know, there's nothing wrong with doing a quick filler episode if you're really, really struggling. It's just like, just let them have a little spa day if they're in town. Why not? Like, it'll save you some peace, and you can just, you know, throw some stuff out on the fly. Another thing is for me, often, especially if I'm doing like that full module I showed you, I started in the middle. I didn't start at the beginning. I was like, okay, what do I need to know in the middle of this? And I did exactly what I did whenever I wrote college papers and didn't know how to start, and just started writing the body text, and then did the introduction, then did the paragraph story hook.
Oh man, is that ever a conversation about pacing as well? Do not feel like you have to slog through the unfun parts to get to the fun parts. If you're like, this is just going to be, just narrate it. Your players are not going to care. Just be like, okay, you spend a couple of days, you do these things. And if they go, oh, wait, I wanted to do this thing, then, you know, treat it as a retcon. Go, okay, let's talk about that. And then you move on. Games like Blades in the Dark and stuff like this, like that's baked into the game. It's like, we're going to gloss over all this stuff. We're going to cut to the action because that's the fun part of the game. And I love what you said about not starting at the beginning, because there have been times where I'm like, man, I've got to establish all this stuff, and we're going to have to spend 2 hours doing this kind of dull, like, I mean, the players might take it and run with it and it'll be really great, but I'm not excited about it, and it might just fall really flat. I mean, don't be afraid to skip over some stuff or just really quickly hit it. That took me a while to learn, so that's why I mention it.
Very cool. And recently, something I've been doing, and this is slow and this is not well paced, but every once in a while in a campaign, I will hold what I call a homework session, where the characters sit and talk about what they want to do next. And that session doesn't tend to be super fun or super fast paced.
Oh, you want to do this? Fascinating.
That's exactly right. And so
I try to have people do that if there's question. If I'm like, okay, guys, I mean, there's 8 ways you could go. What I try to handle that between games, mixed success.
right.
Sometimes you can't get the engagement away from the table, and so sometimes, yeah, you end up with those sessions where it's just, I mean, sometimes you get some really great in character RP, but not a lot happens with the narrative sometimes when you do that. Nothing wrong with that.
I'm actually grateful for those moments, because while that one session is a little bit slower, the next 5 will be great, because they've come together, they've made a plan, and I can kind of respond to that. So yeah, that's the thing I would leave us with.
Another thing with that is that if the idea of doing it as a session is just, you know, too boring, too slow for you and your party, like, that's fine. Stars and wishes. Do stars and wishes after every game. And that way you get your players saying, oh, this was really great. And you can incorporate more of that as you go forward. And you'll have them say a wish, which maybe, I wish for us to see this character again. I wish for my character to get to do this cool thing. And you can file that away as well as you're prepping for future sessions.
So I can intuit some of what you just said, but I've never heard of this stars and wishes terminology.
It literally is, you give
bit?
a star for things that you thought went well, and
So
you give a
stuff you
wish
liked
for what
in
you
that
want to
session.
happen in the future.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's a really interesting way to codify feedback, because at the end of every game I'll be like, okay, what did everybody think? Was there anything that you didn't like or that you really liked or whatever? And I'll sometimes I get good feedback, and sometimes I get, yeah, it was great. Or nah, or, I mean, nobody, they're all my friends, so nobody wants to, like, you know, even if they didn't have fun, they're not gonna tell me that bluntly.
Right.
And you know, but I like the stars and wishes idea. What's something that was cool and something, you know, you kind of think would be cool.
Yeah.
All right.
And you can give stars to other players too. So like, you know, I did a stars and wishes after a Vampire the Masquerade game, and pretty much every player giving out stars gave a star to everyone. Like, this is something that your character did really cool. This is something that you as a player do really cool. And GM, hats off, you did this awesomely. That type of thing. So
if the players are really that engaged with the other players, you are running a really good game. That is,
right.
to
And I
me,
think
that's
that
one of
helps.
the best signs of that, actually.
Yeah, I think knowing that you are going to do stars and wishes at the end also may help you pay attention so that you're not just like, good job, bye. You actually are looking
Okay.
for stuff to compliment them on later.
I may try that.
It's one of Devin Schulich's biggest pieces of advice. He's like, if I could give everybody a solid piece of advice, that would be it.
Yeah,
And,
the first time I did it, it changed my life. It's one of my favorite things I've ever done.
Interesting.
All right, we're out of time, unfortunately. So before we go, I will just leave you with this, that dice were rolled, roles were played, and play was fun. And what else is there in life if not fun? We'll see you next time.